When the Russians invaded Ukraine in February 2022, they were expecting an easy win, for Kyiv to lay down and just surrender. It didn't happen that way, and for 2 years now, the fight has been largely restricted to the borders of 4 regions in the east. And now, as the war ebbs and flows, the Kremlin's ambitions are being squeezed. Which bits of territory will be enough? Do they plan on grabbing more? And does the US and its allies really have the stomach for this fight? I'm Mariam Namazi, and this is Pinch Point, where politics and geography collide. Let's be clear, Russia isn't planning on bringing its soldiers home. Fighting in Ukraine remains brutal, with the Kremlin throwing even more soldiers into the fight. No one knows for sure how many people have died. Russia is keeping the numbers secret, but independent investigators think they have a rough idea of Russian casualties by looking at everything from new graves to social media. They say more than 50,000 Russians have died since the invasion a little over 2 years ago. In February, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelenskyy said 31,000 Ukrainian soldiers had been killed. Other estimates put those losses much higher. Russia's President Vladimir Putin faces an arrest warrant for war crimes issued by the International Criminal Court, and his ally Dmitry Medvedev has described relations with the West as probably the worst ever. Now, Russia's pushing towards the northeastern city of Kharkiv. Critics accuse Moscow of using meat grinder tactics, but forcing thousands of soldiers to fight and die in Ukraine is a tactic nevertheless. But to what end? Here's who has what. Russia overran Crimea 10 years ago and now controls large swathes of eastern and southern Ukraine. In a surprise move on August 6, Ukraine invaded Russia. Within 10 days, more than 100,000 Russians had been displaced, and Ukraine was claiming control of more than 1,000 square kilometers of the Kursk region. Whether President Putin can retake that or take more territory now hinges on how determined the US and other NATO countries are to stop him. The Kremlin is also watching as European Union countries squabble over whether to provide Ukraine with more military aid. It watched too as Ukraine started to run short of weapons because of political wrangling in the US, which delayed a $61 billion aid package. And arguments between NATO countries about whether or not their weapons can be used by the Ukrainians to fire into Russia won't have gone unnoticed in Moscow either. And then there's the US presidential election in November. The US media is reporting that Donald Trump has a plan to pressure Ukraine into giving up Crimea and the eastern Donbass border region, that he could stop the war in 24 hours. It was Trump's supporters who blocked the $61 billion aid package. There are other reports that Trump just doesn't like Ukraine. But then in May came reports that he told donors he would have bombed Moscow in response to Russia's invasion. So, mixed messages there. Then there's the analysts who can't agree on what President Putin actually wants. Will he be happy to consolidate and protect his gains in Ukraine? Or is his plan to turn all of Ukraine into a non-NATO buffer and at the same time bolster his ambitions of restoring Russia's pride after the end of the Cold War? One thing's for sure, the Russians want the port in Crimea, and they know that just off the Crimean Peninsula lie vast offshore oil and gas resources in the Black Sea. There are also large shale gas fields in the Donetsk and Kharkiv regions, and as we've seen across the world, oil and gas are considered worth fighting for.